There's that moment when you're on stage when you just feel, and you learn, it takes years to learn it, that this is the moment. And you just get off stage then, and the audience, and they get excited.
Yeah.
And another 5 minutes can bring them to a completely different place.
Yeah.
When I was asked to do my first TED Talk, they said I had up to 18 minutes. I said I wanted 3. They thought I was insane. That talk ended up changing the course of my career and frankly, the course of my life. It's always better to leave early and have them wanting more than to stay too long.
Put your hands together for Damon Brown.
Do you act differently when other people are watching? I think most of us do. But did you know there's a classic theory behind that? I love to share it with you. It's called the Hawthorne effect. Now, the story starts about a century ago, right outside of Chicago, at a place called Hawthorne Works. Now, the people in charge of the factory wanted them to be more productive, but they weren't exactly sure how. So they started doing little experiments. They make the lights brighter one week, and then dimmer the next week. They'd change the seating arrangements. They do all these subtle changes, some of them known, some of them not known, and see if there was more productivity. And there was. The problem was they weren't exactly sure what X factor made them more productive. So after several years of experimenting, roughly from 1924 to 1933, they suddenly stopped. Until there was Dr. Henry A. Landsberger. He was a psychologist. And in the 50s, he revisited this idea, and he thought there was something that they might have missed. And there was. See, they're looking for one particular factor. You make the lights brighter, and people will be 60% more productive. You make the lights dimmer, and they'll be 20% less productive, things of that nature. There was one common factor, but it had nothing to do with the pieces of the experiment. It had to do with the experiment itself. People were acting differently, in this case, being more productive, because they were being observed. That's the Hawthorne effect. Now, Dr. Landsberger would have a field day with right now, 2014, right? At this very moment, I can take a picture of you guys, which I won't, but I can take a picture of you guys and share it with my 2,000 friends on Facebook. If you have a thought in your head, you can put it onto Twitter, share it with 500 million people. At this very moment, we can download an app called Foursquare, check into this location, and tell the whole world, strangers at all, what we're doing right now. In other words, we're not only focused on observing other people, we're really focused on being observed. We're all under the Hawthorne effect. Now, I love this abstract stuff. I hope you do too. It was about a year ago when I was writing my latest book. I was researching these theories, and the funniest thing happened. I became a dad. Now, as fellow fathers and mothers, mentors and guardians know, when a child enters your life, it's very much a before and an after. And as soon as I looked in my son's eyes, these abstract theories came crashing down. And I understood one thing, and that was the less cynical side to the Hawthorne effect. And that is that children will act differently if they feel as though they're being observed, they're being protected, and they're being loved. Now, my son and I have a ton of routines that we do. This is one of them, and he was about 2 months old here.
Hi, Alec. Hi, Alec. What's up, Brown? How are you? ¿Cómo estás? O genki desu ka? ¿Cómo allez-vous? You okay? I see.
Now, you have one guess of what language I don't know. So as you enjoy TED Active this week, I just have one question for you I'd love for you to ponder. Do you want to be an attention grabber or an attention giver? Do you want to be future-focused, or do you want to be fully present? And finally, and most importantly, do you want to be Pavlovian, or do you want to be truly responsive to the people around you that you love? Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Damon Brown of DamonBrown.net. My thing is helping solopreneurs, side hustlers, and other non-traditional entrepreneurs bloom. Again, you can learn more about me at DamonBrown.net and check out my new book, Build From Now. I want to talk about how you can do a TED Talk. I've actually done 4 of them. I just did my 4th one earlier this year on Build From Now, how to know your power, see your abundance, and nourish your world. Again, you can pre-order at DamonBrown.net. Comes out late January 2021. Got special bonuses, so get over there before January 28th at damonbrown.net, or you can grab it on the other platforms, including audiobooks. And I did end up doing a TED Talk about it. It was my fourth TED Talk in 7 years. I did my first TED Talk when my kid was about to turn 1, and my kid is going to be 8 in this upcoming year. So whatever math that is, 6.5 years. And that's one of the biggest questions that I get is, how do you do a TED Talk? How do you get a TED Talk going? There's actually 3 things that all TED speakers I found have in common. And I've been going to TED for like 10 years. So I would trust myself on this one. If you want to learn more about what I'm talking about, go over to damonbrown.com, because it's inspired by one of my ink columns. There's 3 things that all TED speakers, successful TED speakers I found have. Number 1, they're going to be of service. Number 2, they're going to be present. And number 3, they're going to be themselves, or be yourself. So number 1, be of service. One of the rules of TED, which a lot of people don't know, is that you can't sell from the stage. This ain't Tony Robbins. No offense to Tony Robbins. This ain't Tony Robbins. This is a Gary Vee. This isn't anybody else. It's like, no, you go on there. You are going to be of service. So for those 3-minute talks, which is my first TED Talk, to as long as 18 minutes, which at least until recently was the limitation for TED Talks. You always notice that they usually don't go longer than 18 minutes. They're always of service. And so I've been going to the TED conference again. I think I just went to my 8th TED conference last year. And when you go to the TED conference, the main thing that people want is for you to contribute your big ideas to this collective. And the main TED conference, not TEDx's, which are a lot smaller, but the main TED conference that happens once a year now it's in Vancouver, it's only like 1,500 people. And everyone there is trying to contribute their idea to help elevate the conversation and help support the other people with their ideas. So it's not about selling your stuff. The stage is the exact same way. Another secret, you do not get paid for TED Talks. So I'm on the same stage as, say, Bill Gates and Bono from U2. None of us are getting paid. Now, when I've done some of my TED Talks, they've actually paid for the lodging and the travel, the flights and all that stuff, and they gave me a badge to come into the conference, which, man, the conference itself can be in the 5 figures. So that in itself is a big payment, and they're really selective. Again, 1,500 people. There's only so many people who can come through. So I've been honored enough to be able to come through almost every single year. But you don't get paid for it. So again, it pushes this idea of service. So what are you trying to say? Back when I was in grad school for journalism, I got my master's in magazine publishing at Northwestern many, many years ago. Now it's decades. And the biggest lesson I got from that period of time, including my undergrad at Oakland University back in Detroit, was that if you're going to write, then make sure you have something to say. Otherwise, it's just noise. For instance, again, my new book, Built From Now. This book wouldn't exist if I wasn't contributing to the conversation. Otherwise, this book would not exist. I'm not going to write another book just because I want to write another book or I want to make some money or whatever. No, this needs to be part of the conversation. I'm adding this to the conversation, right? Same thing with your TED Talk. So it's not coming from the standpoint of, I want to do a TED Talk, I want to be on the stage, I want to be on the proverbial red dot. If you watch TED Talks, they're on a big red dot. I want to be on the proverbial red dot. And I want that success and say, I'm a TED speaker. No, it has to come from a place of service. My first TED Talk, I didn't say I was going to be on the TED stage. Being on the stage would be nice, but I wasn't even a professional speaker at that time. I spoke a little bit, but not really on that level. I definitely had been a paid speaker. But I was called on the stage because I had something in particular to say. If you want to check out my own TED Talks, go over to damonbrown.net. I have them embedded in there. Or better yet, go to TED.com and look up Damon Brown. And you can see my latest 2 TED Talks over the last couple of years. So number one, you want to be of service. Number 2, you want to be present. Now, being present, what I would recommend in the past, when things were a little bit more social, is to actually get yourself to a TED conference. The main TED conference, of course, is spectacular. It's like, if you're into opera, it's like going to the Met. You know what I mean? It's like going to the Sydney Opera House or whatever it's called down in Australia. It's like, it's like going to the Globe over in England, like, Shakespeare's old place. Like, it's that level. What I would recommend normally is say, well, that's tough to get in there. right? Was able to get in there. But then there's a ton of TEDx's. But we happen to be in the middle of a pandemic as I'm recording this, and so doing that isn't safe. And also, I'm sure most of the TEDx's, which are the local TEDs, aren't doing their thing anyway, or probably shouldn't be, even with their small sizes. But there's an advantage there. That means that almost all the TEDx's, and I'm familiar with a lot of them, are virtual now. So that means you can be live watching a TEDx, not TED-Ed. TED-Ed is what I watch with my kids. TEDx, watching a TEDx, like you're watching me right now, as I'm watching you right now. So there's no excuse to not be sitting there and watching the live dynamics of a TEDx or even a TED speaker, because now the main TED conference has been virtual the past year too. I went there in May or June. So if you're going to do a TED Talk, people that do TED Talks are familiar with TED, and they see the flow and they see the cadence, they see the feel. And again, in more social times where social distancing wasn't as important, actually being on the ground, sitting in the seat, and hearing the speakers, it takes you to a different level. I love the experience, even as a voyeur, even as an attendee, even when I'm not speaking. In fact, sometimes I enjoy it even more because I don't have the nervousness and I just concentrate on the beauty of all these professional speakers speaking. And even people who aren't professional speakers, which leads to number 3. Number 1, you want to be of service. You're not there to sell products. You do not sell from the stage. I've done 25 books. I've never mentioned my books on the stage. That is literally a rule. But also, it when you're selling from the stage, it changes the cadence. And it makes it feel like that it's not of service, but of commerce. So number 1, be of service. Number 2, you want to be present. That means attend as many of these TED things as you can. And when you actually are speaking at TED or speaking at any event, make sure that you're focused on the audience and not trying to get to the buffet line or trying to get a paycheck afterwards or all those other things. Third, which all ties into this, is to be yourself. Be yourself. One of the unfortunate things with TED is that now, as it's grown in popularity, there is a formula of a TED Talk. And there's some excellent parodies out there. I'm not trying to be like stoic about it. People shouldn't tease TED. I tease TED all the time. Actually, like I know Chris, the head of TED right now. I know a lot of people in the organization. I've done a book with them. I did a book called Our Virtual Shadow. So I've worked with their publishing arm. I've written about them. Again, I'm talking about a column I did for Inc. So it's at damonbrown.com. Like I love TED, and at the same time, it's possible to take things too seriously when it comes to that. But because so many people know the TED brand, they worry about how they fit into that brand. And so if they want to do a TED Talk, then they'll be like, oh, well, I have to do it like this. And I have to dress like Steve Jobs with mom jeans and a turtleneck. Rest in peace of Steve Jobs. But I have to do this. Or I have to just state my hands. Or I have to make really salient points and be super quiet. And then I have to do it like this. And trying to formalize it. And so it's possible to, as I talked about in number 2, be present and learn the style of the people who are presenting at TED without losing who you are. Check out my last TED Talk. It was September 2020. Go to TED.com and go and search for Damon Brown. The talk, which is based on my new book, Built From Now, was called How to Build Power Wherever You Are. Look it up. Check it out. I'm talking to you. It was a virtual talk, so I'm talking to you the same way I was doing the TED Talk for those 13 or 14 minutes. And my cadence is probably similar, hopefully a little bit more polished. This is a TED Talk. But my cadence is similar. I might have been wearing the same clothes. I don't know. I haven't watched the talk in a little while, but it's making the rounds. It's been a few months. But the thing is that I am myself when I do a TED Talk. I got asked to do the TED Talk it was for TEDx Toledo. Shout out to them and to Will Lucas, who runs it. But I went ahead and was asked to talk with them because of the content that I'm already bringing. It wasn't like, well, Damon, you could do a TED Talk if you do it like this. Or it wasn't, oh, okay, you seem to be just like a TED person, so we'll have you speak. No. I've been doing my thing for a long time. I was doing my thing even before TED asked me to the stage what did I say, 7 years ago or so. In fact, with that first TED Talk, the energy was a little bit different than the other talks that were before me and after me. So again, you being present and knowing the energy of TED, that's one thing, but that doesn't mean you manipulate or change your energy to be accepted by the TED audience. And the thing is that I don't know how many TED Talks I've seen, because there's about 100 TED Talks that you end up seeing during the week that TED happens. So at this point, I've probably seen 1,000, right? Because I've been going to TED for like 8, 9 years, and I've been going to TEDx's. So I've seen 1,000 or so TED Talks in person, rough math. And you can tell. You can tell the people who are saying, I'm going to say this, or come on stage and appeal to the TED audience, versus maybe some diamonds in the rough, or people who might curse on stage, which usually doesn't happen at TED. One of my favorite speakers, Ron Finley, who talks about urban farming, and he started a garden over, I want to say in South Central LA, but it's definitely in that area. I want to say South Central though, South Central Inglewood, somewhere around there. And his thing was plant some shit. That was his thing. And the audience just died. It was just cracking up. And I was laughing hard because he's another fellow African-American male, another brother. He's probably a little bit older than me, closer to my mother's generation. And I just related to what he said because he's talking about urban gardening, and he's talking to my generation. And he's talking to African-American males, maybe African-Americans in general, women or people of color who have not been appealed to as far as with gardening. Gardening wasn't hyped up when I was growing up. It still isn't. But hearing him, I'm like, oh, that's cool. Maybe I'll go plant some shit. That was not part of the TED formula. But the TED Talk did extremely well. I was in the audience. I was in tears, laughing so hard because I thought it was fantastic. And he was himself. And years later, I still follow him on social media, say hi every once in a while because we got a chance to meet afterwards. And that's who he is. That's who Ron Finley is. You follow him on Instagram, which is a really good follow on Instagram. You follow him on Instagram at Ron Finley. He has the same exact energy that he had on the TED stage when I saw him, I want to say 2015. Go to TED.com or I'll try to remember to put in the notes and check out his talk. His talk is so genuine, but it's so different than the other talks. But he knew how to present himself in a way so that he was a genuine self. And he also knew the TED format enough so that he was able to respect those 18 minutes. And again, be of service and be present. So if you want to do a TED Talk, concentrate on the surface, concentrate on being present, and concentrate on being yourself. That's the formula. I wish there was more to it, but there's really not. And it might be good to go to the TEDx's. If you can go to TED.com and look up TEDx, and you can find a map where you can find all the different TEDx's that are happening literally around the world. The good thing is, as I record this, pretty much everyone's sheltering in place. So if you want to be involved in a TEDx, then you might be recording from home or from wherever your locale is. And that means you don't have to fly anywhere. And maybe things will be a little bit more open too, or maybe they'll be a little bit more open to taking you on as a speaker, particularly if you're a first timer. Maybe you're not right. And maybe that framework, not that it's incorrect, but that it's biased. And so maybe you should think again about what you're believing. The timing of this book could be better, of course, because I can't speak for the rest of the world. I have not left the country in a while. I used to travel a lot, but I have not left the country in a while. So I can't speak for the rest of the world. Here in America, as they say, it's very polarized. And polarization comes from you believing that you're the only person that holds the truth. And if you're the only person that holds the truth, then that means you have to be right. And because it's a black and white situation, then that means other people have to be wrong. And so there might be a shade of gray. There might be nuances or details. There might be something in the other person's story that makes their story true to them, and it doesn't make it true to you. My experiences as a middle-aged African-American entrepreneur with two little boys who's originally from South Jersey and now based in Las Vegas. I mean, there's all kinds of bias in there, not in a bad way. I mean that from a journalism standpoint, there's bias in there. He talks about that. He breaks it down. I thought it was fantastic. I can't remember which link I gave y'all, but I listened to the audiobook of it, which is why I don't physically have it. I really enjoyed the audiobook. Again, it's narrated by Adam. I know Adam, so it was good to hear his voice on that one. There's a TED Talk that he did that talks about the concept, or one of the major concepts in Think Again. And if you know psychology at all, or sociology, more sociology, then you know the frogs and hot water analogy, where a frog, if you turn up the water, if you put it in regular water and you turn up the heat really quickly, say on a stove, it's going to jump out. But if you turn up the heat slowly, then it might not jump out as quickly. He has a new twist on this, which is really, really interesting. So be sure and check it out. And TED Talk's like 15 minutes. I saw it like a while ago because it was when the book came out. The book came out probably about, his book actually came out when my book Built From Now came out. So his book came out early last year. So I want to say January. We're kind of book twins in that sense. And then I have a recent Bring Your Worst Show episode. Again, it's a regular recorded, edited episodes, one of those that you're going to see Monday or Friday. And it's about Adam Grant and how to give without losing yourself. This one actually leans a little bit more towards his first major book, which was called Give and Take. Excuse me. I think that was his first major book, Give and Take. And I think later on it was Originals, which I have right above my shoulder over there, if you see it above my shoulder. Also an excellent book. But it pertains to things now because we're juggling so many things, because we have so many challenges. Up until a handful of months ago, I was homeschooling my kids because, we were sheltering in place right here in Nevada. We're doing this hybrid work situation. Y'all know I've been hanging out here in this office well before the pandemic. I'm used to working in this environment, but it's a different type of pressure and challenge, and figuring out what those boundaries are when it comes to the workplace. It's complicated now. It's not as simple as saying, I'm not going to take that work home. It's like, your work's literally on your computer. Your work's on your phone. Your work is everywhere. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's happening, right? So again, Adam Grant, the book I recommend is Think Again. His whole catalog is great. So shout out to Adam. All right. So this is my favorite book of the list. In fact, this is one that actually inspired me to even get live today, because I had to talk about this book. The Disordered Cosmos by Chanda Prescott Weinstein. Shout out to Chanda. I got a chance to meet her after her TED Talk. I was just at TED early April. They actually had the in-person again, which was fantastic. So, much love to all y'all. It was a lot of reunions because we hadn't seen each other in person in like 3-4 years for some of us. Some folks even longer. A lot of socially distant hugs. I'll leave it at that. But this was a highlight of the TED Talks that I saw. I've been familiar with her work for a little while. She's a scientist. Obviously, you can tell she's understands the cosmos, and I think the correct word is astrophysicist. So you can correct me in the comments if I didn't get that right. The astrophysicist. Fascinating stuff. But she's also African American. She's also part of the queer community, and she's also Jewish. And so there's so many intersectional things that she talks about in this book. And I've been really combing through it and just going through it. And this has been my summer book. I got it back in April. I've been reading it all summer. So I'm actually not in a rush to finish it. It's just taking my time and enjoying all the good literature in there. And as she told me when I got it signed after her TED Talk, and it was good to again meet her in person because I've been following her work for a few years, particularly online. She's really active on Twitter if you want to follow her over there. If you look at the subtitle, A Journey into Dark Matter, Space-Time, and Dreams Deferred. Now, if you look at the people behind me in the corner, we have St. John Coltrane, right? But of course, you have James Baldwin over here. And one of the contemporaries of James Baldwin would be Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes talked about a dream deferred and what happens. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it shrivel up like a raisin in the sun? If you caught my third TED Talk about why you should strive for good enough, my opening was that poem. It's a poem called Harlem, again by Langston Hughes. And so when I went to get the book signed, and And she had mentioned this because she knew I was into literature, and she mentioned this, and I was like, oh wow. And my TED talk, like a few years ago, 2019, 2018, I mentioned that was an opener with the poem Harlem. So we bonded over that. But that gives you an idea as far as the depth in the discussions. Because we can talk about the world, we can talk about science, but science, aside from the cliche of African Americans not surviving very long in sci-fi movies, aside from that cliche, we don't really talk about culture and race and fitting in and where we belong when it comes to space. There's some strong analogies that have been used. Shout out to the original Star Trek, of course, with like the people that were half black, half white, etc. But to be able to talk about it directly, Shonda does an excellent job of that. And again, I'm loving the book. I usually spend like a week or two reading a book. I've literally been reading it all summer. Like it's been my summer read. If you get my newsletter at joindamon.me, it's free. It comes every Wednesday at 5:55 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. You'll see at the bottom what I'm reading. If you look at the past 5 months, it's been the same book. So just get this book. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. And then you can go ahead and catch her TED Talk, How We Could Solve the Dark Matter Mystery. It has all the charm and energy that she has as a person. And, again, getting a chance to connect with her. And it has the charm and the energy that you're going to feel in the book. So if you're not sure about the book, if you're not sure if science writing's for you, check out the TED Talk. It might be right up your alley. And speaking of that, and I know she's addressed this, and she even talks about this a little bit in the book. I have a recent Bring Your Worth episode that talks about what to do when you aren't taken seriously. I give the whole background or some of the background in the video. I can relate to creating things, and then people are like, what the hell is this? What are you doing? Like, is this necessary? Like, you're contributing to the world. But those very things ended up becoming the bestsellers, becoming the #1 app in the world, twice over with Cuddler. But you have to be able to get through that friction. And in the Bring Your Worth episode, I don't know what that means. Episode, I break down how you can kind of navigate those things. And again, some of the stuff that Chanda talks about, where her being Black and Jewish, and in her words, queer, and being an astrophysicist, it's just like, wow, it's already an area as far as with the front line of science, as far as people are getting notoriety. It's already pretty homogenous. No disrespect to scientists, it's just it tends to be old white males. She was obviously none of that, right? And so being able to navigate those worlds, hopefully this will be a nice follow-up to watching her TED Talk and reading the book, is to figure out how you can make an impact, even if, and particularly if you are different than the people that are establishing the current status quo. I'll get off my soapbox on that. I can do a whole episode on that. Let me relax. Just grab Chanda's book. All right. The next book is Quiet by Susan Cain. As much as I'm babbling up here, I'm actually an introvert. I could shut down this computer, not do Keynote for a little while, and just sit here by myself. I'd be doing great. As my kids would say, oh, it seems like Daddy needs some alone time. I love being alone. Quiet is revolutionary, or was revolutionary, because it was the first book dedicated to us, people who weren't necessarily on the front line of being super social, the people who would go to a networking event or a happy hour and would be happy enjoying a drink or eating a meal by themselves, or, which is more my style, connecting with a couple people and having an extremely deep conversation, which isn't quite the extrovert style. That's more of an introvert style, because I'm more focused as far as where I put my social attention. I can't spread it out. I don't have that kind of stamina. She talks about that. I believe the subtitle is The Power of Introverts. I love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. This book was a bestseller. If you're an introvert, you probably heard about it. If you have not, you're welcome. Please read the book, and there's so much, and a lot of stuff that she talked about which I think the book came out almost exactly 10 years ago. The stuff she talked about actually has been integrated, because she's a consultant too, and a former lawyer, which I didn't learn about until we got a chance to connect a few years after that. A lot of stuff she talks about is now being integrated into the workplace. Now, this was before, obviously, the pandemic and the hybrid workplace. And so certain dynamics, like when I was in Silicon Valley, oh my gosh, almost 15 years ago now, because I left in 2011, so a decade plus ago, that's when we started to shift to open offices and the open space plan. I think that was the term. Open office plan. See, it's so much of a relic, I forgot what it's called. And when you get into the, oh, sorry, Amazon. Okay, the quiet book is displaying for you now. See, I'm so busy babbling, I'm not even updating the app. So hopefully the book is displayed for you now. And the open office space would be basically you old school cubicles. Shout out to Office Space, the movie. One of the best movies about office culture ever. But just cubicles. And it's like, this will allow people to collaborate more and I'll let things to flow. I like working by myself. And I mean, obviously I'm talking to a computer in the middle of a silent room. And after I hang up the computer, I'm going to work here silently until it's time to pick up my kids a little bit later on today. So obviously it works for me, but there's so many of us who are creatives who get our inspiration, not necessarily from silence, but from being able to collect our thoughts. Some people, like my wife's actually an extrovert. And so she gets her energy, which is the definition of it. She gets her energy from talking to other people. So if she's trying to work something out, and people like her trying to work something out, they go and they're like, hey, Damon, I was trying to figure this out. And they'll talk about it. They'll be like, I got it. And then they'll go ahead and do it. I'm the very opposite, where I'd be like, I need to think about this. And then I go for a walk or I go meditate. You know, my meditation corner is right over here. You know, I'll just take a minute. And then I'll be like, I got it. This is what we can do. And then that's how I think. That's how I process things. She gets into that. And she ended up being a really good part of staving that not so great revolution of assuming that everyone was extrovert. But if we go way back to my mother's era, back in the 70s and 60s, to my grandmother's era, back in the 40s, that was always the energy. The go-getter was that guy, usually guy, let's keep it real, that guy that could go into a room and command the conversation. I'm not that dude, as is, I forget the stats. Susan has them in there, but probably half the population and here in America are introverts. So it's like, we're not going to come in like that. But, you know, as I say, I've done some really good damage with my career, so I'm doing something right. So us as introverts are just approaching it differently, even though we're impacting the world. She gives a blueprint for that. If you do not have it on your shelf, just buy it. Just buy it. Especially, even if you're an extrovert, you have introvert kids. For us, one of our kids is an extrovert, one of our kids is an introvert. From literally when they came out the womb, you could tell. It's like, oh, wow, okay. We have two very different personalities. So if you're raising kids that are introverts, if your partner's introvert, you don't know what the hell's going on with them. Again, sympathies to you, you know, et cetera, et cetera. If you have introverts in your life, you need to cop it anyway. Her famous TED Talk, one of the most popular TED Talks out there, The Power of Introverts. Just watch it. I was in the audience, so I don't know if they showed me on the video or not, because sometimes they pan to the audience, but you'll see me really hyped up in the audience if they happen to clip over to me. That was actually at my first TED conference in 2000, I want to say 2012 or 2011. Yeah, fascinating time, but I was happy to be in the audience. Now, if you want to something that's a good companion to that, Bring Your Worth episode about how to slow down without losing your business. It actually features the next speaker I'm going to talk about, but it's an examination of how I was able to slow down the amount of work that I was doing, still stay connected to y'all, still make a living, and still serve. I know what serve means. Serve at a high level over the past, I'd say, 4 months. It's a total breakdown of that. I think the video is about 20 minutes, but that also ties into me being exhausted, frankly, as an introvert, because I was super social. I was doing back to back to back to back to back books. If you do creative projects, or if you're an industry where you launch products and you're doing books back to, or creating things back to back to back, and you're launching them, it requires so much energy. And so this actually ties into the introvert part. So it might be good if you're looking to take some type of break or reprieve from the work that you're doing, particularly if you run your own business like I do, so you have a little bit more options. And or if you're an introvert and you're feeling that you're kind of burnt out on the social thing, this might be a good video to kind of do the connective tissue to Susan's excellent book and her legendary TED Talk. Excuse me. And as I hinted at, Brene Brown, my favorite TED speaker, also spoke at that first TED that I went to. So it was like that lineup was different. Imagine going to your first TED and it's like Susan Cain and then followed by Brene Brown. It's like, whoo. Brene Brown is really into emotional intelligence, particularly in regards to how we feel about shame, how we feel about guilt, how we feel to a lesser extent about regret, and how those play into how we interact with each other on a personal level and also on, as I found, on a career level. And it's so important to understand the blueprint and the details. Again, I'm a business coach. I help entrepreneurs and creators like yourself, including side hustlers and solopreneurs. And her work helped me elevate my game, because if you're having issue being productive, if you have a book that you're working on, but you don't feel like you can finish it, if there's a higher level of your career that you're trying to get to you, and for some reason you're not getting there, it often has to do with deeper feelings that are beyond just, I can't concentrate right now, or I'm not sure if the boss is going to give me a promotion. It usually has to do with things related to self-worth, related to your history, psychological things and emotional things. This is where the emotional intelligence comes into play. And so just reading her work and interacting with her a little bit too online has just been wonderful as far as stepping that up. Of her immaculate catalog, Rising Strong is the one for me. And briefly, it talks about when people fail, to use a harsh word. I don't use the word fail, but I want to be extreme with this one. When people fail, or more importantly, when people feel like that they fail, then what gives them the energy, the presence of mind, where they get the strength to rise strong and fight again. I've had 3 bestsellers, and I've had probably just as many books not do that well at all, like single double-digit sales, which is really bad when it comes to a book, particularly when you're funding the book yourself, as I do, with my independent publishing company. What gives the energy to try it again? Shout out to Aaliyah, right? Dust yourself off and try again. Where does the energy come from? She talks about that, but it has to be an emotional journey as much as a journey of, shout out to Angela Duckworth, as much of a journey of grit. You can have all the grit that you want, but if emotionally you're sick, if emotionally you're not dealing with shit, pardon my French, you're not going to make it. You're not going to be able to really 100% get that strength to get to the next level. She's got some killer TED Talks. This is not the one that I saw in person. This is actually the one that put her on the map 3 or 4 years before this. It's called The Power of Vulnerability. It is excellent. I think it might be the 5th most popular TED Talk of all time. Always doing numbers. So shout out to Brene Brown. I have not read Atlas of the Heart yet. It is on my short list. Probably after I finish Shonda's book. Sorry, Brene. This is number 1 for me right now. But after I finish her book, then I'll read Atlas of the Heart. I think it came out probably about 9 months ago. But she's doing about a book every other year. So it's probably about 5-6 books. I've read most of them, like I said, and fantastic stuff. She's also doing Netflix specials. I have not seen any of the Netflix specials. Again, I got 2 little kids. I'm not watching a lot of TV, but shout out to her and much love, as she was actually taking a sabbatical, which I referenced here. how to slow down without losing your business. So she's actually on sabbatical right now until next month, which I believe is September, right? Until September. Well, I know next month is September, but I believe that's when she comes back. And yeah, she's proof of concept, as I've been saying today. And how can I accept people for who they are? This is a breakdown of something that Brene Brown says in Rising Strong. It is by coincidence, but not really if you think about it, by far my most popular episode of the Bring Your Worst show of the 235 or so episodes that I've done. And it's one of my favorite episodes too. If you haven't checked it out, be sure and check it out. Very brief. I think it's like 8 minutes. Forgive the lighting, because one of my first episodes, so it looks like I'm in like a dark room compared to now, because I literally was in a dark room as well, literally dark room as well as a dark room they do photography in. But I'm so proud of that work, and I was proud to get attention to one of my favorite quotes from Brene Brown, which really has helped me on my journey, not only as a business coach and helping folks like y'all, but also as a as a partner, as a father, as a family member, as a friend, and learning to judge people less. Which, particularly nowadays, we can all use some of that, right? So that's our lineup. So I'll go from the top. We have Think Again. And throw the link up here for you. Think Again by Adam Grant. Fantastic book. The Disordered Cosmos by Chanda Prescott Weinstein. Glad I got a chance to connect with you a few months ago. I'm loving your book. I think you'll love it too, because it's bringing science, but down to actual humanity, as opposed to being an abstract idea. It's Quiet by Susan Cain. It's a classic. I don't need to say any more. And finally, Rising Strong, my favorite book from definitely my favorite emotional intelligence leader right now. Shout out to Brene. I hope you're enjoying your rest, and I hope, I look forward to being able to recommend wonderful books in the future from Brene Brown. I'm sure she's going to be cooking up something marvelous in the next couple of years. Anyway, so Bring Your Worst show. I'm here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. You can always subscribe for free at youtube.com/BrownDamon. And my new book is Career Remix. Get the gig you want based on the skills you've got. It's available everywhere books are sold, as well as everywhere that you want your ears to be. Bring Your Worst show. We're 230 episodes in. I love to have you join me every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Until next time, remember that you can always bring your worth and that you can always build from now. Take care.